Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, an oil field is a new front in Sudan's brutal war.
It's a major resource point for the Sudanese government. It's a major source of income for the South Sudanese government, and now it's under the control of the Rapid Support Forces.
The paramilitary RSF already controls some of Sudan's gold mines and has now captured the country's most important oil field. How does that shift the balance of power? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode and my interview with Hiba Morgan, and what stories you want us to do next. Or on your podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from and give us a 5-star rating while you're there. It really helps other people discover the show. Thanks.
So my name is Hiba Morgan. I'm Al Jazeera English's correspondent in Sudan. And I've been covering this conflict between the Sudanese army and the RSF and the other factions that are involved, allied to both sides, since April 2023, and effectively everything that has resulted from the conflict.
Covering it and living it. Hiba, it is always good to have you. Welcome back to The Take. You took a little pause in the midst of covering it to welcome a new addition. You are a new mom, right?
Yes, I have a baby boy now, and he's a handful. But I would definitely say not more handful than Sudan and the conflict that is currently unfolding with the displacement crisis and, the horror stories that you're hearing from people everywhere.
And there's a new front in the war, which is stretched on over 2 years. It's a place called Heglig oil field. What is the significance of this oil field?
So when you look at the conflict from the moment it started up to the point where the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, took control of Heglig, the focus was mostly on military bases or cities, like major cities, or trying to dominate most of the western part of the country. But when it comes to Heglig, it's the largest oil fields in Sudan, and it's where processing facilities for oil from neighboring South Sudan, that seceded from Sudan in 2011, is being processed for it to be exported. So now it's like the RSF is targeting a vital resource. It's a major resource point for the Sudanese government. It's a major source of income for the South Sudanese government. And now it's under the control of the Rapid Support Forces, which is not a government body and has no agreement with, either South Sudan or Sudan. And now 2 countries are at risk of not being able to provide for themselves.
Armed forces and oil workers reportedly withdrew into South Sudan during the RSF attack. Fighting in the ongoing civil war between the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF shifted to the Kordofan region in recent months.
Okay, well, the RSF, or the Rapid Support Forces, boasted about capturing it on December 8th. And soldiers posted a video on social media. There's a lot of Allahu Akbars. They're chanting. They're happy. They've just captured it. Now, the RSF is, as you said, the paramilitary group that's been fighting the Sudanese armed forces for control of the country. And you can see the joy in this clip. In a statement, the RSF said, quote, "The liberation of the Heglig oil region is a pivotal point in the liberation of the entire homeland." And that's pretty palpable in this clip. But who holds it now might be in question. So before we get to that, tell us, how did this even happen? How did they manage to capture it?
So look at the map. Heglig falls on the southernmost part of West Kordofan, along the border with South Sudan. And just a few days earlier, the RSF was able to take control of Baba Noussa, which is a major city in West Kordofan. And they have control of Heglig, the oil fields now. And that's why you see a lot of joy when it comes to the videos being posted by their fighters. It means that they've taken control of this entire state, and now they have the ability to move further because, it's like free their men and free their fighters and ammunition to focus elsewhere.
What can they actually do with that field? Do they know how to actually produce the oil?
When it comes to the oil fields and the processing facilities itself, they don't have that ability to actually run the oil again because it's not theirs to run. It belongs to South Sudan. But what they can do is disrupt the oil flow. Think of it like, you have a water pipe going through your yard. You can't benefit from the water coming through, but you can cut it. And if you do, well, your neighbor next door is not going to get the water from the tap from the other neighbor. And basically that's what the RSF has, in its hands. It can definitely stop that flow of oil and thus affecting the economy of both Sudan and South Sudan. But what's happening right now, or what has happened, is that Sudan's army, which was in Heglig, has withdrawn into South Sudan. The RSF now control Heglig, but because they cannot operate the facilities, it's now being operated by South Sudan. So, Sudanese army withdraws, South Sudan comes in and operates, but RSF remains in control.
Wow. Well, Hiba, we can't talk about Sudan's resources without also talking about its gold, because in addition to oil, Sudan has this other critical resource. Some of its vast gold mines are controlled by the RSF. And its leader, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti, is believed to have accumulated his wealth and financed this war through an illegal gold trade with the United Arab Emirates. Does his capture of an oil field, even if he can't sell the oil just yet, give him a new pathway to power?
For the RSF, they already have the gold. The oil does not give them a lot of legitimacy. That's the word I'm looking for. It does give them the power to blackmail South Sudan and the Sudanese government. Because again, it's not just South Sudan that relies on the income from the oil coming from Heglig. Sudan also needs it. And so the RSF is now in this position with the gold mines. They were able to woo the United Arab Emirates or the UAE to support them and to finance them and give them weapons to continue fighting, according to the reports that we've seen from various organizations and rights groups. But with the oil, they can't attract the same kind of, support from the Sudanese and the South Sudanese government. Obviously not from the Sudanese government. For the South Sudanese government, because they have this coercion power, power to coerce the South Sudanese government into paying the RSF for allowing the oil to continue to be processed. That does give them additional power, especially over the border areas, allow us to use the border to be able to bring in weapons and ammunitions and our tanks and armored vehicles so that we can capture the rest of Kordofan. That's what they've gained. More access to border point that they would be able to use to be able to bring in ammunition and equipment to continue fighting the Sudanese army.
I'll be back with Hiba after the break. Well, Hiba, there's this phrase that's often thrown around, the resource curse. The idea that nations with more natural wealth deal with more instability. Do you, or the people you've been interviewing, your neighbors, your friends, do you feel like these resources are at the heart of their suffering?
One thing people do say over and over again is that if the RSF did not have access to our resources and our wealth, and when I say our, they're talking about the national resources, something that should be contributing to the country's GDP. If the RSF did not have access to them, they wouldn't have grown this powerful. They wouldn't have the ability to attract, foreign countries to gain their support because they have something to give in return. So for people in Sudan, especially in the capital, and those who understand politics and the conflict, one thing you hear is that we are being killed using our own resources. It's not like the RSF is basically, putting its hand in its pocket and getting its own money to be able to continue the conflict. It's not like, after, with the reports that the UAE is backing the RSF. They're not doing that just for the sake of it. Obviously, they have something to benefit. And people know that, that at the heart of all of this, what's keeping this conflict ongoing is the fact that there's resources, or there are resources that can keep the flow of cash and the flow of weapons ongoing. And so people feel that the RSF was given way too much access to what they are not entitled to, which was basically the gold mines when they were the Janjaweed to fight the Darfur rebels during the Darfur War. The fact that even after that, they still had access to other gold mines. The fact that up to date in Darfur and other parts, there are still areas or mines that are under the control of the RSF and so out of the government's hands and can't contribute to the GDP, can't help with the inflation, can't help with, with the civil servants and their workers' salaries, or to try to stabilize the economy. So people believe that there's been a mismanagement from the get-go, not just during the conflict. The fact that the RSF was given this much access to something that could have stabilized the entire country, that could have, improved the quality of living for almost every single person in the country.
Yeah.
They feel like it's a curse, but it's more of a curse, that we had governments that allowed this to happen. We're cursed because we have governments that mismanage the resources to the point where a paramilitary has been able to use it to grow so powerful it can turn against the army and the government.
Well, a Sudanese army source told the AFP news agency that it withdrew from Heglig oil field to, quote, protect the oil facilities and prevent damage. But this is a huge loss and embarrassment for them. Could it force a negotiation between the two groups?
We've already seen the army, the RSF, and the South Sudanese government reach a deal with regards to operating the facilities, the oil fields in Heglig. The army withdraws from the facilities, the RSF, they remain in control, but they don't stay inside the facilities, and South Sudan operates. They were able to reach that agreement. But the reason why, we saw an agreement there is because, obviously, of the importance and significance. This is foreign oil. And the incomes needed for both Sudan and South Sudan. The RSF, obviously, with the hopes of running the country someday, they don't want to mess their relationship with their neighbors. So they're obviously not going to go against South Sudan's wishes to try to maintain its economy. But that's when it comes to the GDP and a source of income. That agreement was, doable or easy to reach. But when it comes to ceasefire, humanitarian access, we've seen several bodies in several countries trying to push for that ceasefire. But the RSF, while agreeing to it verbally, we've seen them launch attacks on and off in several parts of Sudan, especially around Kordofan. And the army, on the other hand, they didn't even bother saying, we would agree and continue fighting. They made it very clear. We're not up for a ceasefire unless the RSF withdraws from certain cities. And so the conditions for getting a ceasefire is not the same conditions when it comes to an agreement for the Heglig oil fields. This one is pretty basic, let the oil flow and we all benefit. Here, it's I want what you took and you want what I took. And if there's a ceasefire, who controls what? What kind of governance are we having? How are we going to manage? How are we going to merge? And that's why, when it comes to a ceasefire, it's much, much more complicated than, just when agreeing on how to allow the oil to flow. That's very easy compared to what could transpire when you talk about ceasefire between the RSF and the army.
Well, finally, when we think about a ceasefire and hope that that day is very soon, I'm reminded of all that you have gone through as a reporter who's living there over these past few years. And I wonder what life is like for you and your neighbors and your friends now, especially because you're in a part of the country that is now taken back by the military. Has life gone back to normal for you? Do you feel the effects of this conversation we've just had on your everyday life?
I mean, we've been here since the start of the conflict. What I do is I can't help it. I mean, I'm pretty sure nobody can help it here in Khartoum, is you look at what you knew and what you have in front of you. I'm talking about streets. It's hard to explain how, the feelings that you go through when you're going through streets that were once familiar and now they're very much empty. You can see bullet-riddled buildings and walls. And in places where, there was life and, vibrancy and a lot of people and movement, now it's just, a lot of closed shops. It's hard to reconcile those two images in your head, the one in your head of what used to be with what you see in front of you as you navigate Khartoum after the army took control of it. When the war started, we had to hear a lot of gunfire and artillery fire and drone strikes. And there are days where there would be no power. I would say there was once an entire month where there was no power. And, running water sometimes is such an issue that, you have to try to source the water from the river or get someone to get water from the river for you. We're not going through that now, thankfully. It's much better when it comes to living. But despite the fact that the power is a bit more stable, water is a bit more stable, the telecommunications are a bit more stable, we've seen, and I have seen, how the cost of living has become so hard for so many people. How you have to cut down on spending and how you have to decide what is necessary, what's not necessary.
Financially, the situation is difficult. The situation is difficult for the Sudanese people generally, including me and others.
For some people, having more than a meal a day is a luxury. There are families that I know who just rely on a single meal a day, and it's not that nutritious when you look at it, but it's what they can afford. So, you're still seeing, I wouldn't say the conflict in Khartoum because that's over, but you're seeing the aftermath. The fact that, the healthcare is so decimated that there are a lot of people who can't get to proper hospitals. And in a way, the conflict is not over because everything that it has touched is still there.
This is a call for the youth to return. I know there are no jobs right now, and there's not much to attract people. But when people return, that accelerates the reconstruction process.
The damages to the infrastructure. They destroyed roads and the buildings. It's still damaged. There are water processing facilities that have still not been fixed. And when you look at people, carrying the injuries of the conflict, the fact that, they were able to survive, but they've lost their income. Everywhere you turn, it's just a reminder that, this capital has gone through a conflict that has never happened in its modern history. And it has been so intense and so fierce that it was able to literally touch every single person that was living in the capital and beyond.
Wow. Well, Hiba, thank you for walking us through and for sharing your insights and also your reporting on this. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Malika.